Welcome to Vanadium, answering the mail. And I want to thank everyone for their support and their condolences for Mystique's passing. And I'm still pretty sad about everything, but I especially want to give a shout out to Superfan and Superfriend Ryan. Thank you so much for your really thoughtful comments and for holding it down both on the Conspiracy Brothers podcast and the brother to the Conspiracy Brothers podcast, the Vanadium podcast. So thanks so much for being such a sweet dude. Can't tell you how much I appreciate it. And it really means a lot. You know, it's like being like the first one of the few people of a growing audience. You know, I'm really gonna, important part of the Conspiracy Brothers family. So thank you for your support. So I'm going to answer some questions today. They've been coming in the mail. Actually, some pretty good ones. They've been coming through my website, christopherrankin.net. There's mostly, I've received a lot of these questions kind of in my social life as well, but related to COVID. So how to deal with the, best ways to deal with the COVID, the least invasive. Ways to just like at least eliminate the possibility of transmission or reduce the possibility of transmission. It's the more appropriate way to think about it. And one of the things I suggested to people is a UV light. So you use a very weak UV, so to speak. So 405 nanometer, which is the wavelength of the light you're looking for. And there's LEDs that can supply this light that are very safe, they're efficient. And you don't have to use things like arc lamps, which are really powerful, but can also kind of be dangerous to your skin or your eyes. So there are these LEDs you can put up at 405 nanometers, and this tears that virus a new asshole. So, as they say as virologists say, that's the technical term they use. Technical terminology: rip the virus a new asshole. But. So yeah, I really recommend these lights. I actually have one. Let me grab one. Actually, this is what it looks like. Bang! Look at that LED light panel, 50 watts. Got this off Amazon, and let me tell you, man, that those little photons of light at 405 nanometers, they're gonna make that virus think twice, and a lot of other things too, a lot of other nasties. But it's not gonna give you a tan, and shouldn't hurt I wouldn't stare at it, but it shouldn't hurt your skin too much. I wouldn't like bathe in it nonstop, but terrific. Like $30 or something. So yeah, there's about 4 or 5 questions just related to that. So that'll knock those off. So I think it's an interesting point though. And using light is a lot more of an elegant approach to using chemicals, if you ask me. Because the light it really just destroys the molecular machinery of the virus and just makes it a piece of dust, basically. They can just suck it up in the vacuum cleaner. It's inert at that point. So, all right, UV lights, I love them. Okay. So, Chris, do you know of any legitimate paranormal research? Oh, I do. And I've been following a lot of this stuff for quite a long time. And it's one of the reasons, and I'm not going to fit this into this one answer to this one question on this one segment of Answering the Mail. But I will say that there's scientific evidence to support paranormal ideas and the idea that things are connected in ways we don't understand. That no scientist has a credible way to really attack these results. So I'll talk about some of that stuff, and you can dig into it yourselves and ask me more questions about it. But I'm just going to give you some names and give you some directions of what to look into. So one guy who I started reading about when I was in school, named Brian Josephson. He's a physicist at Cambridge University. And he is won the Nobel Prize. And he developed a lot of ideas around superconductors. And his big claim to fame is he invented the idea of a squid device, as they say in the technical world. Superconducting quantum interference device. And he is now, I believe he's a full-time faculty member at University of Cambridge. And he also does paranormal research. So he believes in ghosts, and he believes in poltergeist phenomenon. He believes in certain sort of spiritual charging, for lack of a better term. to spaces, to things. And it's really interesting. And he has, I don't even fully understand his perspective on the situation, but I know a little bit of it, and I know that he is way beyond my intellect, and he is somebody worth paying attention to. And if you look at his research when he was really young, he's doing great work his whole career. He's a genius. Just think about what he's saying. It's really interesting. Brian Josephson. And I'm sure he's probably a great guy too. Probably, he seems like it. So, all right. And then one of the other guys is Rupert Sheldrake. So there's this idea of the morphogenetic field. And it's the idea that there's more than just biology and biochemistry that drives the structure of animals. And that there's some other field that governs the way that we are animate. So, and it's interesting. And it says that, it's a kind of a non-reductionist philosophy. And it makes a lot of sense. And so Rupert Sheldrake, he has a bunch of stuff on YouTube. And he's an older gentleman, but he is as sharp as, way sharper than me. And he has some fascinating things to say on all sorts of topics. So look him up too. I'll even maybe put some links to Rupert Sheldrake's talks. But one of the things that one of his old lectures clued me into as somebody who studies crystals is that in the early days of making, when you make a new molecule, a new crystal structure, you have to nucleate it, and it kind of the atoms stack up in a certain order to get the structure that you want, the right animal, if you will, the right species. And sometimes those atoms are more or less likely to stack up in a certain set of conditions. And sometimes it's so elusive to find those sets of conditions and how they arise, and how sometimes it's able to happen more easily, and how temperature and time are just two variables, and there are some others that we perhaps don't understand. And some really interesting ideas about generating new compounds. And also the ideas of rats solving mazes. So if you have two distinct families of rats, completely non-related, no contact whatsoever on different continents, if you teach one set of rats mazes, the other set of rats will become more adept at solving the same problems. So they'll be more likely to solve it. So it's like, it's almost as though there's a shared wisdom that animals kind of go into, like a cloud. There's like a cloud knowledge or something where we can kind of tap into it. And, Carl Jung, collective unconscious. So, okay, there is definitely legitimate research in that area. And not far from where I grew up, at Princeton University, there was a laboratory dedicated to paranormal research. And it produced a lot of stunning results. And it was shut down in 2008, I believe. And they ran a bunch of random number generators, digital and mechanically based. And they observed these the number distributions, the random distributions over periods of time. And they noticed that the randomness would shift from perfectly random to having some sort of distribution. There'd be like a signal in the noise, and there would be times where this would occur, and what should just be there should be no signal. And one of these times was 9/11. So the lab was shut down after that, but the Princeton Paranormal Research Lab, I can supply some links there, but I believe the website's still active. I'm sure the university doesn't like to advertise that, but fascinating stuff. And definitely there were scientists that got paid to work on this type of stuff. Look into remote viewing. These things, you convince people to spend a lot of money, you got to have some evidence. As I've gone in my career of doing science and being able to make a living at it, you have to show some evidence to get people to fund you, especially at the, more than tens of dollars of level. You got to show a little something. So these studies have been funded for long periods of time, and then they say they're shut down and then they're continued. So just look into it. And there's a guy who does past life research, and I don't know if he's still with us, but his name was Ian Stevenson, and he interviewed a lot of kids about their past lives. Look into that shit too. Fascinating. Okay, so are you a real scientist? That was a question that there was no name for that question on my website. You know, I guess I technically am. I do have that title. I do receive funding as salary, and I do produce results, patents, publications, and that is how, if you were to ask me before I ever did any of those things, what a professional scientist does. I do all of those things. However, in the course of doing all of those things, I've become greatly humbled. And I mean that in the best possible way, meaning that the more that I've learned, the less I feel like I grasp. And the more, and on the other hand, the more I'm able to actually do, but the more elusive I realize that the truth really is, and how much more mysterious the world is than we can just possibly fathom, and that we're lucky to ever be able to get a handle on it, even moment to moment. So am I a real scientist? Technically, yes. Do I feel like one? Less every day, the more I learn. And that there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I've heard people mention too, and that's true. The less if you have sort of just the most basic understanding about something, you can seem like you just can run the show, but it's because you haven't seen all the holes yet. You don't understand that things don't really stack up perfectly. And that's how a lot of times you can tell a real expert from a fucking charlatan. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know. I'll let the audience decide whether I'm a real scientist. Oh, do I have any advice for people during COVID era? Well, UV light, but honestly, I want to give a more general piece of advice. When your back is against the wall, it can feel like the worst position in the world. Because there's like, oh man, there's nowhere I can go. My back's against the wall, right? You're locked up against this wall. There's nowhere you can go, right? But your path is clear. You know what you do. There's only one way to go, and that's forward. So life has just figured it out for you at that point. So that's sometimes you got to recognize those situations, and instead of feeling destroyed by it, feel empowered by it, because at least your choices are narrow. You can charge in one fucking direction without even a second thought. You don't need to second guess yourself because there's no other choice. You got to charge ahead. That's my advice. It's not really advice, but that's what I'm going to say today. Reasonably, hopefully that's coherent. And the other one is, whatever you're doing, try to get as good at it as possible and always be looking to the frontier. So in all my work and everything I do, I realize that I'm not going to be the best at it. I won't be. There's always going to be somebody better. But I want to understand where the frontier is, and I want to be there, and I want to be having my work producing the most value by understanding the problems and the questions that are the most important things. Like and that's true. And it's true with science, technology, art. Those things are all the same, and you shouldn't try to differentiate them. And I think when people do, it just creates like a bunch of fucking stupidity. But anyway, find the frontier. And the other piece of advice is stand up to life. The fucking craftiest, cruelest enemy of them all, life. Damn that motherfucker. And don't take it shit. Don't take life shit. And meaning that I understand you got to deal with consequences, and time marches forward, and it doesn't take any fucking prisoners. But your spirit can stand up to it. And you don't need to you have to do this forever, but just get through it for another day. That's what I can say. That's all I have in me right now, and some days. So one of the other questions that came up, why have you stopped reading Break the Bastion over YouTube? And this question was from a gentleman called Dennis. So the reason is that I am dreading one of the chapters that's coming up. and I will read it. And there's also a fairly long chapter that I know that I won't be able to fully get through without having to take a break. So I'll probably just like break it up into 2 parts. And it's also, there's a very difficult bit of the writing that's coming up where I'm going to have trouble reading it, and I'm kind of just find myself pushing it off, procrastinating. So that, if the audience will allow me to keep procrastinating, I will keep procrastinating, but I am going to come back and do that. And it's not going to be months or weeks. It's going to maybe weeks, but I'm going to come back to the reading of Break the Bastion, and I'm going to finish the reading out, because I think the book is, I don't know, I really believe in that book, and I didn't promote it the way I should have at the time, because there was just so much going on. But so that's that. I was answering the mail. So once again, shout out to Superfan Ryan. I really appreciate you, man. And I hope you're having a great Memorial Day weekend. And thank you, Vanadium audience. And I hope you guys have a wondrous time. Thank you very much. This is Vanadium.